They told you how Jesus Christ died. They told you about the apostles, but they never told you how his mother disappeared from history. Mary wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who claimed she conceived without a man. In first-century Judea, that wasn't holy. It was dangerous. Some believed her. Others saw her as a scandal, even after Jesus Christ rose to fame. Mary lived with whispers that never fully disappeared. In the shadow of the cross, as the sky bled into twilight, the world, as Mary knew it, ended. The death of her son was not just a personal agony. It was a cataclysm that shattered the very foundations of her existence. The Gospels fall silent on the immediate aftermath of her grief, leaving a void filled only by the echoes of a mother's sorrow. Yet, in this profound darkness, a single final instruction from Jesus offered a glimmer of a path forward. From the cross, Jesus had entrusted his mother to the care of the one he called the beloved disciple, John the Apostle. "Woman, behold your son," he said to Mary, and to John, "Behold your mother." The Gospel of John states simply that from that hour the disciple took her into his own home. This act of filial piety established a new sacred family born from obedience and love at the foot of the cross. John, now Mary's guardian and protector, assumed a solemn responsibility to shield her from a world that had just executed her son. For a time, it is believed they remained in Jerusalem. The Book of Acts depicts Mary present with the apostles in the upper room, praying steadfastly as they awaited the promised Holy Spirit at Pentecost. She was a central unifying figure in the nascent church, a living link to Jesus, a matriarch whose quiet strength and unwavering faith anchored the frightened disciples. Her presence was a source of comfort and continuity, a tangible reminder of the life and teachings of the man they had followed. But the city that had been the stage for both Jesus' ministry and his death was becoming increasingly hostile. Persecution against the new followers of the way was escalating. For a figure as prominent as the mother of Jesus, remaining in Jerusalem posed a grave danger. And so a pivotal question arises, one that has intrigued theologians and historians for centuries. Where did they go? The biblical narrative offers no definitive answer, leaving a gap that has been filled by two powerful and enduring traditions. John, fulfilling his sacred duty, would have sought a safe haven for Mary, a place where she could live out her final years in peace, far from the turmoil of Judea. One of the most prominent early traditions, supported by several church fathers, claims they fled to Ephesus. This bustling, influential port city in modern-day Turkey was a major center of early Christianity and a place where John himself is said to have ministered for many years. Proponents of this view point to the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, where Mary was proclaimed Theotokos, or God-bearer. The council's location is seen by some as an implicit acknowledgement of her connection to the city. This tradition suggests a quiet life for Mary, living under John's protection, her days spent in prayer and reflection, her story preserved within the heart of a growing Christian community far from the land of her birth. Others insist she stayed in Jerusalem. And then history goes quiet. No eyewitness account of her death, no official Roman record, no detailed burial report. But centuries later, stories begin to appear. They say the apostles were mysteriously gathered to her side, as if they knew she was about to die. Some claim she didn't suffer. She simply fell asleep. After a life lived at the very center of salvation history, the final chapter of Mary's earthly story presents one of Christianity's most profound and enduring mysteries. The canonical scriptures fall silent after the events of Pentecost, leaving no account of her final days or her death. Yet, from the earliest centuries, a powerful and consistent tradition emerged to fill that silence. Here's where the mystery deepens. According to these ancient non-canonical texts known as the Transitus Mariae, or Passage of Mary accounts, her death was not a solitary event, it was a reunion. The apostles, scattered across the world on their missionary journeys, were said to have been miraculously transported back to Jerusalem to be with her in her final moments. They gathered to bid farewell to the woman who had been a mother to them all, the steadfast heart of the early church. After she fell asleep, as the tradition reverently describes it, the apostles carried her body in a solemn procession and laid it to rest in a new tomb located in the Kidron Valley, near the Garden of Gethsemane. They sealed the entrance with a great stone, intending to return to pay their final respects. The story continues that 3 days after her death, the tomb was opened. Some versions of the legend say it was for the Apostle Thomas, who, much like his story with the resurrected Christ, had arrived late and wished to venerate her body one last time. The other apostles agreed, and with heavy hearts they rolled back the stone. And inside, nothing, no body, no remains. The tomb was empty. Instead of the decay of death, the accounts claim the apostles found only the burial linens left neatly behind, and the air was filled with an unearthly beautiful fragrance. The implication was immediate and staggering. Her body did not remain on earth. It had not seen corruption. This event forms the bedrock for two distinct but related doctrines: the Dormition in the East and the Assumption in the West. The Eastern tradition of the Dormition, meaning the falling asleep, emphasizes the holiness of her death and the immediate reception of her soul by Christ, followed by the resurrection and translation of her body to heaven. It is a holistic view of her passage. The Western Catholic doctrine of the Assumption, defined as dogma in 1950 but held for centuries, focuses specifically on the moment her body and soul were taken, or assumed, into heavenly glory at the conclusion of her life. While the language and emphasis differ, both traditions converge on a central, radical belief. The tomb of the Mother of God is empty for a reason. Her story did not end with death, but with a final, glorious reunion with her Son. Some call this the Assumption, the belief that Mary was taken into heaven, body and soul. We have traced the traditions of Mary's final years from Jerusalem to Ephesus. We have explored the rich narratives of her Dormition and the profound doctrine of her Assumption. And yet a fundamental question remains, one that echoes through 2 millennia of faith and scholarship. Why is the end of her story so much less documented than that of the men who surrounded her? The fates of the apostles, while often brutal, are recorded with a certain historical and theological finality. Peter crucified upside down in Rome. Paul beheaded outside the city walls. Andrew martyred on an X-shaped cross. These accounts, preserved by early church fathers like Eusebius and Tertullian, became foundational stories for the communities they established, their martyrdoms serving as the ultimate witness to their faith. But for Mary, the mother of Jesus, the scriptural record falls silent after the gathering of the apostles at Pentecost. The canonical texts of the New Testament, our primary sources for the life of Jesus and the birth of the Church, offer no account of her death. Why this silence? To understand it, we must step back and look not at what was written, but at who was doing the writing and why. The first and most significant factor is the cultural context of the ancient world. History, as a discipline, was almost exclusively the domain of men. The authors of the Gospels, the writers of the epistles, and the early church historians who chronicled its growth were all men, writing within a patriarchal society. In this world, a woman's story, no matter how significant she was typically told only as it related to the prominent men in her life: her father, her husband, her son. Mary's identity in the Gospels is inextricably linked to Jesus. She is the Virgin Mother, the faithful disciple at the cross, the prayerful presence in the upper room. Her role was defined by its relationship to the central story of salvation history, the life, death, and resurrection of her Son. This leads to the second crucial point: editorial priority. The Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles were not written as modern biographies, aiming to capture every detail of a person's life from birth to death. They are theological documents, crafted with a specific purpose: to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ and persuade people to believe in him. The evangelists selected and arranged their material to make a theological case. The details of Mary's later life and her passing, while deeply meaningful for personal devotion, were not considered essential to this primary evangelical mission. The narrative focus was on Christ's work and the apostolic mission to spread that message to the ends of the earth. Furthermore, we must contend with the simple, unforgiving reality of historical transmission. The centuries that separate us from the first century church are marked by immense gaps in the historical record. Countless documents have been lost to fire, war, decay, and neglect. The stories that survived were often those that were copied and recopied, treasured by specific communities as part of their foundational identity. The accounts of the apostles' martyrdoms were preserved because they were central to the identity of the churches in Rome, Corinth, and beyond. Mary's story, particularly concerning her final days, appears to have been transmitted primarily through oral tradition for a significant period. These were stories told and retold among the faithful, passed down from one generation to the next. While powerful and spiritually rich, oral traditions are fluid. They evolve and can be difficult to pin down with historical certainty. It was only later, from the 3rd and 4th centuries onward, that these oral traditions began to be written down in texts like the Transitus Mariae, or the Passing of Mary. By then, multiple versions of the story existed, contributing to the different traditions we see today in Jerusalem and Ephesus. In the end, the silence in the earliest texts is not necessarily a sign of insignificance, but a reflection of the priorities, culture, and historical realities of the time. Mary was one of the most revered and powerful figures in early Christianity, a status that needed no written defense. Her voice wasn't silenced. Rather, her story was lived, venerated, and transmitted in a way that transcended the written page through prayer, liturgy, and the collective memory of the faithful. Her ending wasn't a forgotten postscript. It was the beginning of her role as a spiritual icon for billions to come. Was it intentional, or simply the way history worked? The truth is, we don't fully know how Mary died, but her story didn't end in silence. It became something greater than history could record. A woman once whispered about, now remembered by billions.